if you're not too sure about your degree, you've taken an extracurricular, like I took religion, which I loved, think about maybe switching your degree. I know that's a scary thing, but pursue those passions that you find, and you might find yourself doing something you never imagined and loving it. So, growing up, I didn't know what I wanted to be, like I mentioned. I didn't want a 9-to-5 job. I didn't want to be in a cubicle. I knew this for sure. And so, I consider myself a jack of all trades, master of none, and I just felt hopeless about what I was going to do. I like to plan my life, and I just had this void. So about this time last year, I was in Campus Central. I'd finished up a class. I was going to look for somewhere to sit, do some of my reading, and I noticed that there was a career and employability event going on. So I walked around the stalls, and there was things for Marie Curie, Enterprise cars, and all these things didn't really have anything to do with me. Work experience is great. Don't get me wrong. You could be a history student working with Marie Curie and go on to do X, Y, and Z. You don't need to have specific work experience. However, at the very end of all of the stalls, you'll hear a familiar name soon. I saw a booth for the Argyle's Museum, and I met Caitlin. And not to be dramatic, but I think that changed my life. So I grabbed a slip, I filled it out to become a volunteer, and within a week or so, I was volunteering weekly as a museum guide. And that wasn't something I had seen for myself. And I absolutely loved it. For the first time, I found myself in a job that I could envision myself thinking about it. Before I started uni, I didn't have great work experience that you think of in a traditional sense. I was a babysitter after school. I was making sure kids did their homework, brushed their teeth, and, so I thought, I have to be in a cubicle, or I was thinking all these traditional senses of jobs, and I never thought that I could, just start in on something. You think, oh, well, there's starting jobs, and then there's the real jobs. I didn't know how I could get there as a student. And so the more I went into the museum, the more I saw myself doing something like this as a career. I was a little worried about how I'd be able to grow from a museum guide. It's a starting level job, and I couldn't see myself 30 years down the road volunteering as a museum guide. And so another incredible coincidence, or fate, or whatever you believe in, had me continuing on my journey. So I took part in the Careers and Employabilities module that was a work placement experience. And I had already had these ties with the museum, and so I asked if I could work with them again. And they said yes. So then I got in touch with the museum, and we saw what I could do to kind of further my experience beyond just being a guide. And so I found myself revamping our handling boxes. So a quick background for what a handling box is, because that's something very niche, I think. There are these cases that we bring out when schools visit the museum, or when we go to schools or community events, and they have genuine or reproduction items inside that tell you all about a period in history in a hands-on way. So the handling box that I got to see for the very first time at the Careers and Employability event had a widow penny from World War I. And so this was something really interesting to me, When you think of museums, you don't think of things you get to touch. So I jumped into this head first in being able to revamp these boxes. I was given, I think, 3 boxes to redo based on World War II on the home front. And while I admit I jumped straight in, I did also panic a bit. I was in the deep end now. I was working in a museum. I had to work in the archives and use these computer programs that I had no clue how they worked. And suddenly, I was also learning about World War II from a different perspective. This is all British history. I learned American history. Sometimes things pop up in your career that you may not experience, and they're learning moments, and they're things that can be exciting. And so I also had to deal with being able to produce educational content from someone from 5 to 85. And as my boss can tell you, we went through a lot of drafts on my educational cards. I had to cut out some words here, add some more context here, and it wasn't easy, but I loved it. It was hands-on, it was fascinating, and I was learning, and I loved it. So I also kind of learned a bit about the work life. I was sitting inside an office for hours at a time, and instead of feeling like I was stuck at a desk, I felt like I was on a scavenger hunt. I was searching for information. I was looking for different ways to do what I was doing that weren't quite working out. I also had a brief background in education. In high school, I took a university-level course that had me doing student teaching. And so, as mentioned at the beginning, I thought I was going to maybe be a teacher, but I just couldn't see it for myself. And now, all of a sudden, I was able to broach education from a different stance. Instead of standing in a classroom Monday through Friday and teaching people, I could make educational content for a museum and teach people in a different way, in a more hands-on way, specific to my interests, which, awesome. So as I continued on my project, working side by side with our education officer at the museum, I realized that this was a goal I could set for myself. I had a career I could envision with steps along the way now. I found a job working in an office that let me interact with people. It was the best of both worlds. And I could maybe even teach people, and I could share with them. So now I have a position in mind. I'm continuing working at the museum. I'm working on new boxes, very exciting stuff. And I'm just trying to soak up all the work experience I can while I'm still in uni. And you may have gathered since you are here or you're watching, the Career and Employability Service is fantastic. They got me where I am here today, as well as Caitlin, because Caitlin wishes that she had someone like her. Well, Caitlin is my person. She's gotten me through this, and I have ideas now. It's so exciting. So if you're coming up on second year, take the module for the work placement. It is fantastic. You get to be, getting hands-on while learning, because you're still doing assignments and all that, but you're not sitting in seminars every single week either. So to finish things up, in first year, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do with my life. Just 2 years later, I know what I want to do, and I know how I'm going to get there. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Alejandra. That was really, really great. I think it's fascinating, your journey, for how you go from not knowing what you want to do to now you have a really solid idea. And I'm sure Caitlin will also agree with me, you're an asset not only to the museum but to the faculty. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, of course.
Has anyone any questions for Alejandra? Yes, Khalid?
If there is one thing that you would love to change back ago, what would it be?
So if there's one thing that you had to change, what would it be?
I think it would be not to limit myself. Back in high school, I was dead set on these job ideas. And I think had I let myself have some wiggle room, I wouldn't be so stressed out. I thought teaching is for me, and it wasn't. So I think one thing is learning flexibility. I would have loved to learn that lesson a little bit earlier in life.
I think that's something that everyone struggles with. Yeah,
it's something that's ongoing as well.
Any other questions? Yes, I would.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks, Rose. Any tips on for students to sort of have that motivation that you have to get out there and have those life-changing moments, meeting people like Caitlin's future? Because if we kind of knew this was going to happen today, on that day, we definitely would be ready for that. Sometimes you just have to take that leap.
So do you have any tips for students to get motivated?
Absolutely. I would say get out there and find something to do. You know, I mentioned I'm in the theater group. I tried the university's theater group and it wasn't for me, so I found one in town. So, you know, we have all these clubs and societies that are fantastic, but don't feel like you're limited to that. You know, you can find all these experiences anywhere. So I would say if you have something in mind that you're passionate about, go and look for it. If you're interested in English, go look for writing opportunities or editing or anything. If you have a niche, you're going to find other people who have that same niche as you, and you're going to create friends, and you're going to have an incredible support system as well.
Any other questions? Yep, Sharon?
You mentioned that obviously now, after all of your experience that you've actually gone through, you now know where it is that you want to actually end up, what your actual end career goal is, and you've got a plan in place now. Have you got any hints and tips as to how to develop a plan, as to how to actually get from where you want to be to your desired goal?
Yeah.
So you've said that you have a plan now of where you want to go. Do you have any hints or tips for other students in developing that plan?
Absolutely. I would say the first real concrete thing you can do is research an industry. So, you know, when I was young, I was hesitant about working in a museum because I thought the only thing that happened in a museum was some person took you around and told you every single painting or statue that there was, and that was the only thing you could do. And as I got older, I realized there's curators, there's guides, there's ticket booths. And then as I got even older, I realized there's people up in an office somewhere doing work. So the best thing to do is research the field that you think you want to go into, look at different positions, and you know, there are starting positions, there are positions that are higher up. So I kind of decided that education officer is something that seems quite appealing to me. So I looked at all of the different positions that I think might be helpful to get myself there. And also, I think on a more personal advice would be patient with yourself, because it's kind of a daunting thing to try and plan out your life to decades in advance, potentially. Your ideas are going to change, you know. I might not be an education officer one day. I might be working in coding or something totally out of the blue. So be patient, be open, try new things, and you might find your passion.